In fact, we live in a me-first culture, don't we? I can't tell you how many times watching shows or movies, or even in conversation with people, you hear people say, man, you do you, whatever makes you happy. If it doesn't serve you, let it go. But the truth is, from the beginning, we have to replace that mindset. That's what God tells us to do, replace that mindset. In fact, what he's talking about isn't for a particular set of circumstances. It means I am third always. I am third in everything. It means every single day, I need to remind myself that in every circumstance, in every interaction, in every relationship, at work, in my home, when I come to church, that God is first, others are second, and I am third. And it wasn't just the Apostle Paul who actually spoke about this. In fact, Jesus himself actually talks about this concept. And in the church world, we know this as the greatest commandment. And maybe you've read this before. I've read this many times, but I hope that today this falls fresh on you because this has potential to blow your mind. Because at the time, this was a completely new revolutionary idea. It's completely brand new. This is nothing like any other religious structure that they've ever experienced up until this point. And here's what Jesus had to say. It says in Matthew 22, hearing that Jesus had silenced the Sadducees, the Pharisees got together. One of them, an expert in the law, tested him with this question. It says, teacher, which is the greatest commandment in the law? I just want to point out how they try to corner him. So basically, they've already been trying to put him on the spot. They've been asking these questions. They want him to mess up. They want to throw him in jail. They want to see him killed. They want to end this guy. They want nothing to do with Jesus. He's a problem to them. And so they're trying to trap him. And so they bring together this question, and this is their moment of trapping him. They're like, what's the greatest commandment? And they're going to see what he's going to say. Because these religious leaders, they had spent their whole lives as experts in law studying all the commands and the law, 600 plus commands, 600 plus laws, and they're like, what's he gonna say here? And his first response, it kind of blows your mind because it's almost like a Sunday school basic 101 answer. Here's what he has to say. Jesus replied, love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. And right then they're like, oh, basic, easy answer. Good job, Jesus. You did good. You're on the not the good list. You're good now, Jesus. But then he says something, it's a little bit challenging to them. He says, this is the first and greatest commandment, and the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. All of the law and the prophets hang on these two commandments. Now that verse there where it says, and the second is like it, some of the other translations say it's equally important. The second one is equally important. So it's basically saying that like loving God and loving your neighbor has equal importance. And this was mind-blowing. You have to understand, in that day and age, that was a mind-blowing concept to them. Because up until that point, loving God and have a relationship with him was a strictly vertical orientation. It's, are you right with God? Are you good with God? Have you obeyed the laws? Are you good? Then we're good. This is the first time we see it going almost horizontally, where it's like love God vertical, but it's a horizontal, where the people around you actually matter. You see, something you may not know is back in that time, people could do all kinds of bad things. For example, they would speak down to women. They would abuse others with power. They would marginalize people of other races and cultures. But as long as they were fine with God, as long as they sacrificed enough or followed the commandments, then they were good. This was like every major religion and every century up until this moment in time, until Jesus comes along on the scene. In fact, when it says the law and the prophets hang on these commands, I think if Jesus had a screen, I'll show it in a second, but this is something I saw a pastor in Georgia named Andy Stanley actually shared about this concept when it says love God, love your neighbors. This is what he had to show. Let's show it on the screen here. He said that when it says all the laws hang on these two commands. So basically what it would show is it'd be like, if you're reading the Old Testament, if you get caught and stuck up in the laws and do this, don't do that, all of it hangs on these two commandments, is to love God and love your neighbor. So if you find yourself in the book of Isaiah and you're stuck, you're lost, you're confused, go back to these two commandments. If you find yourself in Daniel, you're like, what do I do with this? What do I do? It's like, is it loving God and is it loving your neighbor? It all falls on those two commands. And it's interesting because all those commands, 600 plus commandments, it was reduced for the very first time to two, loving God and loving your neighbor. And you can just imagine the experts in the law who have spent their entire lives measuring their success with God based on these commandments and measuring everybody else, who did what, who didn't do what, all of a sudden they see that and their mind is blown because they thought it was about all of those things. When Jesus is like, are you loving God? Are you loving your neighbor as yourself? In other words, and this is the big idea for today, is that love for God is best illustrated, demonstrated, and authenticated by love for others. Love for God is best illustrated, demonstrated, and authenticated by love for others. So that means if you love God, great. It has to be love that outflows from that. I can remember in 2016, I had the privilege of taking some students and some leaders in a high school trip down to Nicaragua. Nicaragua is the second poorest country in the Western Hemisphere. The poverty they live in is absolutely devastating. It's just walking through there, it really opens your eyes up to the way a lot of the world lives. But we went there with some students. There were 16 high school students and about 5 adult leaders. And we were there, and one of the days we had the chance to go help out a local village. And they said, hey, we're going to send you into this place, but don't be alarmed. Just want you to know this is a dump. This is a garbage dump. We're going to send you there, and your goal then is to go there and help people find resources, go through the garbage, help them with plastic and other things like that they can either sell or use in their home. And I was like, okay, I wasn't fully prepared. We get there, I mean, there's acres upon acres, as far as the eye can see, of just garbage and people's homes among the garbage and kids and families running around and elderly and young and babies all running around this garbage dump and vultures and cows and horses and stray dogs and I mean, it was way out of my comfort zone. And I remember they said, hey, we want you to go look through this garbage. And I remember just being in there and just having a moment, just walking through, and my knees, just felt like light. And I felt like I was going to pass out because I'm like, what? This is the way people are living. And here's the thing, I wouldn't normally go through and jump through the garbage to look for things, but it was a love that I had for these people and the love of God through me that allowed me to step out of my comfort zone, what I wanted to do in order to serve them. And over the next couple of days, we actually were leading a kids camp. So it was 3 days, 3 nights, overnight with these kids. And it's crazy to think, but the parents there, they would send their kids onto a bus and say bye to them for 3 days and 3 nights. Some of you, that sounds like heaven, right? You're like, send them away. But there was like 3-year-old to 13-year-olds there. Like, it was crazy. But I think they just thought this was a chance for something new and something different. And so what we did is we planned songs, we planned games, we planned activities, and hung out with the kids all day, all long, singing to Jesus, teaching about Jesus. And it was incredible. It was life-changing. In fact, our HC Youth Director, Connor Mead, was a student on that trip with us that time, and it was awesome to have him there. But these students and these leaders were just showing so much love to these kids that they had never met before. And we were singing with them, we're having fun with them, and we had to give this energy that we're not used to because of love. It was motivated by love. And it was so cool because the people, when they talked about us, they noticed there was something different about us. That no, Americans don't normally do this. It must be something different about you guys that makes you want to do this. They took notice of the fact that there was something different, and we were motivated by love. And I want to just share something with you guys about that trip. See, we had teachers, we had nurses, we had business leaders all on that trip. But they said in their own way that it was more satisfying than any profitable quarter report they had ever delivered to a board of directors, any award they had ever won for teaching, any raise they had ever received, or honors and recognition. The only reason anyone would ever do that for those people is the love of God. And it's almost like God created it this way. He created a system in which so often we think it's about us. We're at the center of the universe. The world revolves around me. And he says, no, let's flip it around. It's God and others above you. God is first. Everyone else is tied for second. And me and you, third. I'm third in every single thing. And then Jesus, when he's about to be crucified, he actually meets with his disciples. He does something completely revolutionary. He's about to meet with his disciples. He's about to be killed. He knows his time is coming. And he gives them a command of what to do and a new charge of what they're going to do. And this, for those people that first heard this was once again mind-blowing that the God of the universe would do something like this. And we have to take note of this. And I've read this verse. I'm not even kidding when I say I've read this verse probably 1,000 times in my life. And there's one section that just stood out to me so much this past week that I hope that stands out to you. But keep in mind, Jesus is about to be crucified. He brings his disciples together for something called the Last Supper. He has a meal with them. He's predicting his death. They think he's crazy or lost his mind. They're like, what is happening? And one of the things he did was he actually washed his disciples' feet. Now, for those of you who aren't familiar with that custom, because we don't do that in this day and age, it was something that they would do back then. But what would happen is if you invited a guest into your house, you would have one of your servants wash their feet. Not just any servant. It was the lowest of the low. You'd say, hey, wash their feet. When the guests come to my house, you're going to wash their feet. So it was something reserved for the lowest of the low because they had such dirty feet. And Jesus, in this final time with them, actually washes his disciples' feet. And here's what he says, because he's like, I'm going to say something to you that's going to change your mind. It's a new command. And you can imagine they're leaning in. They're like, what's the new command, Jesus? What's it going to be? They're taking notes. They're so ready because they don't even know what he's about to say next. And here's what he says. A new command I give you. Love one another. And I imagine they threw their pens down and they're like, for real, Jesus? That's not a new command. Love one another. You've been saying that for a while and you keep talking about it. I wish you'd change the subject, bro. And then he says, as I have loved you, so you must love one another. As I have loved you, so you must love one another. And that's the part when I read it this past week, it changed me. Because it's not just love each other, but it's as I have loved you. And for so long I thought about it, I was like, well, it means Jesus' death on the cross, which it does. But I think there's so much more to that we can apply to our lives today. When he says, as I have loved you, the people in that room, they were very close with Jesus. These were his friends. And I imagine when he said, as I have loved you, they instantly knew exactly what he was talking about. I can just imagine, and although this isn't written, I know I'm taking some liberties here, but I can just imagine they sat around that circle and he says, as I have loved you, so you must love one another. And he looked to his buddy Matthew. And he said, Matthew, do you remember what you were doing before you became a follower of me? Do you remember what you were doing? Oh, that's right, you were a tax collector. Remember how everybody hated you? You felt rejected. You felt like an outsider. You felt like an outcast. And remember when I first met you, Matthew, and I invited you to follow me? Remember what we did? We went to your house. We had a party. You invited all your friends. It was awesome. Remember how you used to feel like an outsider? And now you fit? You're like one of my crew? Think about that. That's how I've loved you, Matthew. And then he looked at a guy by the name of Nathaniel who was in his inner circle. And Nathaniel is the guy who famously, when he heard of Jesus, he said, what good can come from Nazareth? Which is, I think, how oftentimes we think of people. We're like, oh, that person really? Why did they deserve that? Whatever. What good can come from Nazareth? And he looks at Nathaniel. He says, hey, remember how you ridiculed my family? Remember how you took shots at my friends in my hometown and my village? Well, I want you to know, Nathaniel, I would never do that to you. I would never show that sort of prejudice to somebody else or to you. As I have loved you, so you must love one another. And they looked at Peter. Peter is one of his closest buddies. And he's like, Peter, you know how you always seem to say the wrong thing sometimes? You get a little bit excited and seem to mess up and screw up from time to time. I just want you to know, Peter, even though you've messed up, and to be honest with you, you're about to deny me 3 times. Today, on this day, you're going to deny me 3 times. I want you to know, Peter, I would never deny you. So as I have loved you, so you must love one another. And they knew it, and it blew their minds. This wasn't average, everyday kind of love. This was love that revolutionized the world. And then he continues on in this verse. And he says, by this, everyone will know that you are my disciples if you love one another. And my friends, that is the part that stands out. It's by this, everyone will know that you are my disciples. Not based on how you vote, not based on what you share on social media or all those types of things that we think matter. And I'm not saying those things are bad, but all the things that we think show that we're Christians, he's like, no. By this, the world will know that you are mine. What? If you love one another. That's the very thing that sets you apart from anybody else. And when he shared this concept, it blew their minds because compared to the laws they'd grown up with and all those commandments, all the things they had to do, it was way less complicated and way more demanding. This was way less complicated and more demanding because in that world, they always ask the question, what does love require, or what does the law require of me? When faced with a moral situation, what does the law require of me? And in this moment, we're reminded to ask the question, what does love require of me? And oftentimes, that's the most demanding thing. Is it not to know what the rules say or how to follow the rule book? It's like, what does love require of me? It means looking at situations with friends, family members, enemies, coworkers that you like, coworkers that you don't like, your spouse, your siblings, your kids, and saying, what does love require of me? It changes everything. And not just your average, everyday love, but loving people as Jesus chooses to love us. As he has loved us, so we must go and love other people.